Begin today the Gemara on Daf Yud Aleph from its base, the bottom line. The Gemara continues the halachis about being Ma'aber Shana. When does Bezdin establish a Ibiyar, the extra month for the year? Tana Rabbanon, so we learned in a Braise, Ei Ma'aber Shana B'Shnei Oven. You will not be Ma'aber the year if it's a year of a hunger, a time of a hunger. And Rashi says the reason is because when the Tvua will run out, and they have the little that they have from the new season, and they have to wait an extra month until Pesach when they bring the Karban Omer and can't eat Chodosh, so it's a problem in a year of a hunger. So therefore you don't delay the Karban Omer. Tanya, or let's take out Tanya, Hoyer Rab Meir Omer, or Rebbe Omer, that we learned this from a pasuk where it says, V'ish ba mi Baal Shalisha, a person came from the place called Baal Shalisha, Vayavi le'isha alekim lechem bikurim, and he brought to Isha lekim, which refers to Elisha. So he brought him bread bikurim, the first bread, esrim lechem, 20 breads, se'oirim v'gaime, that were made from barley. So what do we see in this pasuk? Ve'elocha kala b'chol Eretz Yisrael avashal perisea. There's nowhere in Eretz Yisrael where the produce or the grain becomes ripe quicker. Yosem mi Baal Shalisha. More than this place, Baal Shalisha. And yet at that time, lo bikra ela min echad. What was already ripe? Only one min, only one of the grains. Now, which one of them? Shema toima chitim. If you think that it was the wheat that was already ripe, tamad loima sa'irim, that they made bread only from barley. Only barley was ripe. Now, shema toima lefnei oimer. If you would think that we're talking about over here, that this was brought to Elisha before the Karban Omer, in other words, before the second day of Pesach, when you bring the Karban Omer, Talmud Loima, the pasuk there goes on and says that Elisha said, "Ten la'om v'yoichlu, give for the people and they can eat from this." So that means that Achar ha'omer haya, it was after the Omer and they were allowed to eat from this new grain. If it was before, you couldn't give it to the people to eat from this. Now, so learn from here, Ru'uya Haisa Shana Shetisaber, that year was supposed to be a Shana Mu'beres, an Ibiyar. Now, why didn't the Mipnei Ma Lo Ibra Elisha? Why did Elisha not establish it as an Ibiyar? Because Shishnas B'Tzeiris Haisa, because it was a hunger year. As it says there earlier in the pasuk that it was a hunger year, and V'Hayu Akoyel Ratzin LeBeis Agronis, and therefore everybody was running to the threshing place where they have the grain, and it wasn't enough, and therefore he didn't make it an Ibiyar. Okay, so Taisus over here says that how do we know that this was a time that they should have made it an Ibiyar? Maybe, this Baal Shalisha is only one place. You see over here that in this place, Baal Shalisha, the Tvua wasn't ripe over there. It's only one section in Eretz Yisrael. There's other things that you have to take into account regarding making a Ibiyar. So over here it says that in this place it wasn't ripe, so that from this we know that they should have made it an Ibiyar. But Taisus explains that that's why the Braise adds and says that Baal Shalisha is the place that it becomes ripe the first. If in Baal Shalisha the Tvua was not ripe at this time of the year already, it must be that really it should have been an Ibiyar, because already after the time of the Karban Omer, the Tvua wasn't ripe yet. So it's not Oviv. It's not, Oviv means when the Tvua in the field is already ripe. And so therefore we see, because of what they had, didn't even have any chitim that were ripe yet, they should have made it an Ibiyar. That's what you see from the story here. And so the reason they didn't is because of what it says earlier in the pasuk there, that this was a hunger, and therefore they didn't make it an Ibiyar. Yeah, now Taisus adds another thing, that it must be that they did not make it an Ibiyar. It doesn't say it mefurish in the pasuk that they did not. How does the Gemara know they did not? So Taisus says if they would have made it an Ibiyar, they must have been able to find more grain, wheat that would have been available. So from the story in the pasuk, you see that they should have made an Ibiyar that wasn't available, and still they did not, because it was a hunger. Tana Rabbanon, another Braise we learned, Ei ma'avrin es hashana lefnei Rosh Hashanah. When the Bezdin sits to decide, to establish what's going to be with the following year, whether they're going to be an extra Adar or be an Ibiyar, they can't sit and decide this before Rosh Hashanah of that year. And if they did sit and they decided to make it an Ibiyar, it does not become an Ibiyar. If it's a time where they have no choice, So Rashi says either because they have someone that would be there from the Bezdin to discuss this matter, that he's only here now and he's not going to be available later, or because of the government that did not allow the Yidden to and stop them from establishing this. So then in such a case, miyad, they can make it an ibiyar right away after Rosh Hashanah. So Rashi actually says that what this means is they establish it before Rosh Hashanah as an ibiyar, and they let the people know after Rosh Hashanah about this. The main kepeda, as we'll see from the continuation of the Gemara, the main point here is not to let the people know too early before Rosh Hashanah. You have to let people know after Rosh Hashanah, so by the time Pesach comes, they shouldn't forget about this and they shouldn't come to end up eating chametz on Pesach. So therefore you let them know right after Rosh Hashanah. Although they're establishing the ibiyah already so early on, when you add another month, which is the other month you add, you only add a second Adar. You don't add any other month of the year. Taisus here brings, it says in the Megillah, L'chodesh shnei masar hu chodesh Adar. So you see that Adar has to be the 12th month. If you can add another month, then the Adar is not going to be the 12th month. Rashi in Rosh Hashanah says another reason. It says chodesh ha'aviv, which by Nisan Shomer is chodesh ha'aviv, that when you want to keep the seasons, that the lunar calendar should be going along with the solar calendar, Shomer chodesh ha'aviv, so you add a month of Adar right before chodesh ha'aviv, which is chodesh Nisan. But the Gemara asks on this, is this true that we don't make the ibiyar before Rosh Hashanah? But for Sholchel Rava, there was a message that was sent to Rava, and they wrote to him as follows. Now, this message was written as a crypted message, so that the government shouldn't be able to read it and understand what was being written here. And they wrote to him as follows: Zug ba mirekes. There is a pair of Talmidei Chachamim that are coming to you from Rekes, which was Tveria, and V'tofsu Nesher, and they were caught by the soldiers and by the Persian soldiers. Rashi says. That's what the Nesher here hints to. And what do they have in their hands? And in their hands they had these Talmidei Chachamim. What are they coming to you with? Dvarim hanase beluz. They have things that are made that come from the city Luz. What is it that comes from Luz? Tcheles. They had the tcheles that has to be used for the tzitzis, as Gemara brings in Saita, that Luz is the place where they brought the tcheles from. Now, b'schusam, or first b'schus rachman, that is, in the schus of the Eibishter, which has mercy, and b'schusam, and in their schus, or others are going to b'schuschem, in your schus, yatzu b'sholem. They went out free. And another thing that was written there in the message, v'amuse yereche nachshain, the descendants from Nachshain ben Aminadab, which is from Shevet Yehuda, and now the Nasi in Eretz Yisrael, the leader of the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, comes from Shevet Yehuda as well, a descendant from Nachshain. Bikshu l'kvaya netziv echad. They wanted to establish and add another month of Adar to the year. V'lo hinichon adomi alaz. And the Adomi, in other words, the government, the Goyish government, did not allow Yidden to establish this. Aval bala yasufais nesvu v'kovaloi nitziv echad b'yerach shemeiz by Aaron HaKohen. But nevertheless, the Balei Asufis, which refers to the Chachamim, they did gather and they established another extra month. Now, when did they establish this? When did they sit to decide this? B'yerach shemeiz by Aaron HaKohen. It was in the month Chodesh Menachem Av, when Aaron HaKohen passed away. As we know, Chodesh Av is the Yartzeit of Aaron. So here, what do we see clearly is that the writing Rava, that the Chachamim already decided way before Rosh Hashanah to establish a Ibiyah for the following year. So how could you say that we don't decide this before Rosh Hashanah? And says the Gemara, Chashuvi mechashvi. To make the calculation that the following year will be a Ibiyah, that they can calculate already in advance. But Geluye lo megalu, but nevertheless, you can't reveal and tell people that the next year is going to be a Biyar until after Rosh Hashanah. As I mentioned before, the main point is that people should know about this later on so that they won't forget by the time Pesach comes. My mashma, the high nitziv, lishna de yarchohu. So here when they wrote that they wanted to add an extra month, the term that was used is a nitziv. The nitziv is that extra month. What does the term nitziv mean that it means an extra month? It says the Gemara, the Chsiv, it says in the Pasuk, L'shleim shnei masa nitzivim al kol Yisrael. The Shlomo Melech established 12 nitzivim, 12 officials that were appointed to take care of Yidden. V'kilkulu es hamelech, v'es hanoshov, or v'es beisa is supposed to be. They made sure that the king has what he needs and the people of his house. Chodesh b'shana, for every month of the year. In other words, there was another person, one person that was appointed for every single month of the year, that he's the one that makes sure that the king has what he needs for that month of the year. So because it says here the term nitziv, that the person was appointed for 1 month of the year, so the term nitziv is being used also for adding another month. So the Gemara says, but vaksiv, the pasuk then says, v'nitziv echad asher ba'aretz, that there was one additional nitziv, another person that was appointed in the land. Who was he? What was he appointed for? So Rav Nachman argued about this. Chadomar echad memun al kulam. This additional nitziv was another person appointed above all of them to make sure that each one of them does what they need to. Chadomar keneged chodesh ibur. That additional nitziv was for a year where there is an extra month, and he would take care of that extra month of the year. And another brayse we learned, you can't establish a ibiyar from 1 year on the following year. According to Rashi, what this means is, you can't establish, if you see that the following year has to be a ibiyar, you can't decide, you know what, let's just take care of it this year, and then we'll be ahead. We'll go already ahead this year before the following year. You can't do that. It has to be for that time, that year, that has to be done. And also, v'loi shalishonim zu achazu. And you can't establish 3 years, one after the other, to be an ibiyar. Because then it comes out that you're pushing off Pesach so far that Pesach is going to end up somewhere in the middle of the summer. Omer Rab Shimon, so Rab Shimon said, but Maise b'Rabbi Akiva. There was a story with Rabbi Akiva. Shayachavish b'veis asurim. He was in prison. And v'ibe shalishonim zu achazu. And he did establish 3 years as an ibiyar, one after the other. So they responded to Rab Shimon and said, Mishom Raya, you're bringing a proof from what happened by Rabbi Akiva. Bezdin Yoshvu v'kovu achas bismana. That the Bezdin, they established each year according to its time when it has to be. What this means is they didn't actually establish 3 years consecutively to be an ibiyar. They made the cheshbon together with Rabbi Akiva exactly when you need to make an ibiyar over the next number of years, and they made a cheshbon with him for the next 3 ibiyars that they had to make because Rabbi Akiva was in prison and they didn't know how long they were going to be able to discuss this with him. And then they established each ibiyar in the time that it had to be, but not consecutively. So therefore, there's no question from there. This is the first pshat that Rashi says, but there's another pshat here in Rashi, and Taisvis also says this pshat, that when it says here that v'loi shalishonim zu achazu, it doesn't mean that you don't establish ibiyar 3 years consecutively. That's pashut. What it means is you can't even establish it, the cheshbon, to decide now for the 3 ibiyars that are going to come over the next period of years. You have to decide each one separately in their time. That's what the Gemara is discussing. And the Gemara asks from Rabbi Akiva, and there the Gemara explains also that by Rabbi Akiva, they did not decide all at one time. Later, the Bezdin sat down, after they heard the Cheshbonis from Rabbi Akiva, the Bezdin sat down and Cheshboned out each one in their time when whether they should establish it as a Shana Mu'beres. Tana Rabbanon, and another brayse we learned, Ein ma'abren es hashana loy b'shvius. We don't establish a ibiyar not if it's in a Shemitah year. Because in a Shemitah year, you can't plant, you don't have enough tevuah to eat, so you don't want to add an extra month to the year. And not in the year after Shemitah, because you don't have anything from what grew in the 7th year. You have to go back from the 6th year. You don't necessarily have any more from the 6th year. So therefore, you don't establish them. When were they accustomed to establish it as a ibiyar? Erev Shvius, the year before Shemitah, and the Erev Shemitah. That's they can add another month. It's beneficial because like this you have an extra month to work in the field, to have extra produce, extra grain for the coming year. Rabbi Gamliel, by the Bezdin of Rabbi Gamliel, they did establish an ibiyar even on the year after Shemitah. And the Gemara explains why. The year after Shemitah, they don't have enough grain that grew in Eretz Yisrael. They didn't work the whole year, so why should they establish an ibiyar the following year? Says the Gemara, the argument here in this brayse is based on the machlokes of a Tanoim and a different brayse. The Tanya we learned, you're not supposed to bring vegetables, produce from outside Eretz Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. But our Rebbes, they were matter, you could bring vegetables and produce from outside Eretz Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. What's the basis of their machlokes here? And what's really the issue of bringing produce from outside Eretz Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, the question is, are we concerned that when you bring these vegetables and the grain, so you bring it along also with pieces of earth from Chutz La'aretz, and Chachamim were geyser on the gush, on the earth of Chutz La'aretz, that it brings Tomeh, and if you bring it into Eretz Yisrael, so when it's in a place, in a house, under a roof, in a tent, it's going to be Metame Taris in Eretz Yisrael. You don't want to cause Tomeh in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, according to the first opinion here, in the first opinion in this Braise, so the same thing also, but again to the year after Shemitah, because there's not a lot of produce in Eretz Yisrael, you can't establish it as a Ibiyar. But according to Rabbi Gamliel, it's not a problem. You can bring from Chutz La'aretz the produce in Eretz Yisrael, like the Rabbi Seinu that said that they're allowed to bring into Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, the year after Shemitah, you're allowed to establish it as an Ibiyar. And another Braise we learned, you do not establish a Nibiyar mipnei hatuma, because of when you see that people are going to be tamei and they're not going to be able to bring the carbon pesach betara. So Rashi here says, let's say for example they see that the nasi is already very not well, and if he passes away, and they know that he's going to pass away before by Erev Pesach time, and then the Yidden are all going to go to his levaya, and they're going to be tamei, and they won't be able to bring the carbon Pesach betara. Or in other cases, when you see that most of the Yidden are tamei, and they don't have any more from the para aduma, and they can't be metar the Yidden, so they should not. This is the fact that Yidden are not going to be able to bring the carbon Pesach betara. That's not enough of a reason to make a shana muberes. Rabbi Yehuda says ma'abrin, that this is a reason to establish the year as a shana muberes. Now, Maise, Rabbi Yehuda continues, there was a story, B'Chizkiya Melech Yehuda, with Chizkiya, which was a Melech Yehuda, She'iber es Hashana Mipnei HaTumeh. He did add a month, make it a Shana Muberes because of the Tumeh. Then Rashi brings that in his times, by his father, Achaz, that was a king, he didn't serve the Avodah Zarah, and they became Tomei from the Avodah Zarah. And he wanted to bring Yidden to do tshuva then in his times. But he saw that he's not going to be able to be metayed all the Yidden on time for the carbon Pesach, and he was ma'aber the year. He added a month. And then after that, but then he saw that what he did was a mistake. They shouldn't have been ma'aber the shana just for this reason, because they won't be able to bring the carbon Pesach betara. And he asked the Eibusher to forgive him for this. As we see this in the pasuk, it says, "Ki marbis ha'am rabas mi'Ephraim or Menashe Yisachar Zvulun lo yitaru," that most of the people from the Yidden, from these shvatim, they did not get a chance to be metired themselves yet. And then the pasuk goes on to say, "Ka'achlus ha'Pesach b'loy ka'kosav," and then they ate the carbon Pesach not the way it should have been done, and that's referring to this. The Gemara here is darshaning that the pasuk here is referring to this, that he was ma'aber the year, even though he shouldn't have for this reason. Ki yispal chizkiyahu aleim leimar Hashem atoy v'chaper bad, that the Eibusher should be mechaper for them for this, that it was ma'aber the year, even though he wasn't supposed to. Okay, now the Gemara will soon ask, Rabbi Yehuda is the one that just said that this is enough of a reason to be ma'aber the shana. And here he's bringing the story from Chizkiyahu that he asked that he needs to ask kapara. I get a kapara for this, that he was ma'aber the shana for this reason. Okay, the Gemara will change the gear, so we'll see. Rab Shimon says, Im ipnei atume brua mi'uberes. If the reason you're ma'aber the year making an ibiyar is because of the people that are tamei and they won't be able to bring the carbon pesach betare, then it's mu'uberes. It's not a problem. Why did Chizkiyahu HaMelech ask that Eibusher should forgive him? You only can be ma'aber the year if it's still in the month of Adar. And he was ma'aber the year Nisan ben Nisan. According to Rashi, the pshat is after they were already mekadesh the month of Nisan, he changed his mind and he decided that instead of it being Nisan, it should be the Chodesh Adar Sheni. Now, once you're already with Mekadesh it as Chodesh Adar, Chodesh Nisan, you can't go back and say that it should be a Chodesh Adar Sheni. That's what he was asking the kapara for. Rab Shimon ben Yehuda says another pshat, what Chizkiyahu HaMelech was asking kapara for, Mishum Rab Shimon, he said in the name of Rab Shimon, Mipnei sheheisi es Yisrael, lases Pesach Sheni, that he told the Yidden that they should wait to bring the carbon by the Pesach Sheni. The Gemara is going to, and that's what he's asking kapara for, because he was not supposed to say this to the Yidden. When most of the Yidden are tamei, then they bring the Korban Pesach Rishon. Roiv of the Tzibur is not pushed off to the Pesach Sheni. And that's what he was asking a kapara for. Okay, the Gemara will soon explain exactly what happened and what exactly he asked a kapara for. Now, the Gemara starts with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda said, Ma'abrin, that you could establish an Ibiyar in order for Yidden to bring the Korban Pesach Petara. Says the Gemara, Alma, what I see from this is that Israel Rabbi Yehuda, that what's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? That Tuma, the Chuya hi betzibur. When you have a carbon that's the tzibur is bringing, so the Tuma that Yidden here are Tameh, and they're allowed to bring the Korban Pesach if they're Tameh. But what does it mean? Tchuya. The Chuya means, as Rashi explains, Tchuya means that we push it off with difficulty. If there's no choice, if they can't bring it betare, so then they can bring it betumah. Now, there's another opinion, as the Gemara is soon going to ask, that it seems like that this is what Rabbi Yehuda himself holds, and that is tuma hutra b'tzibur. Tuma hutra b'tzibur means that in a case where the tzibur is tamei, so over here it's not tchuya with difficulty, it's not pushed off because we have no other choice, but it's actually totally mutter. The fact that it's being brought betuma is the same like tara, it makes no difference at all. So the fact that it says here, that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that just the fact that it'll bring the Korban Pesach betuma is a reason to make another month, to make it an ibiyar, so they can bring it betare. So that means that even though they could have brought it betuma, but it's only the chuya. That's with it. You have no choice. But if they can, they should establish an ibiyar so they can bring it betare. But so like Gemara asks on this, but we learned in the Braise, and here the Gemara is going to bring Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in this Braise, and as we'll see from the end of the Braise, that it seems that Rabbi Yehuda is the one that holds that Tumah is Hutra b'tzibur. That if it's a tzibur that's Tameh, then it's just like Tar. It's the same thing. It's totally mutter. So now, what does it say in the Braise? Now, tzitz. The tzitz, which is one of the big day Kohen Gadol that he wears, and the tzitz is the one that is meratzeh for Tumah, for karbanis that are brought b'tumah, and it's not known, it was unknown that it was brought b'tumah, so it's meratzeh. That's it. It's the one that brings the ability that it should be accepted, the carbon. Now this tzitz, that's meratzeh for the karbanis, bein sheyeshna metzchay, bein she'ena metzchay, meratzeh divrei Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon says whether it's in the time when the Kohen Gadol is wearing it, whether in the time when the Kohen Gadol is not wearing it, the tzitz is the source of the koyach that's meratzeh for those karbanis that are brought betumah that it should be accepted. Rabbi Yehuda argues and says, if it's still on the being worn on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol, meratzeh. So then it sits, has the effect that it's meratzeh for the karbanis that should be accepted. But if it's not on his forehead, meratzeh. So then it will not be accepted. It does not cause to be meratzeh for the karbanis that are brought betumah. Rab Shimon. So Rab Shimon asks Rabbi Yehuda, so how about Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim? So again, Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim yichiach from the Aveda of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, and the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, so he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and he does the Aveda without wearing the tzitz, because he wears the big day lovan, and he's not wearing the tzitz at all, which is gold, he's not supposed to wear it. So that should prove she'enai al mitzchay, that even if he's not wearing it on his forehead, and still at that time it's meratzeh for the karbanis that he's bringing at that time. The effect of the tzitz has to be for that time as well. That even then the karbanis that he's bringing, which are karbanis tzibur that he's bringing for Yom Kippur, that if it's going to be a problem of tumah, it's going to be meratzeh even if the kohen is not wearing it. So we see that it's meratzeh always, whether he's wearing it or not. So Rabbi Yehuda answers and tells him, Hanach le'yom kippurim shetumeh hutra b'tzibur. When it comes to the karbanis tzibur that are being brought, so even if it's brought betumeh, it's not a problem at all. You don't need the ritzui of the tzitz. When do you need the ritzui of the tzitz? For a carbon that's supposed to be brought betare, and it wasn't. So then you need the ritzui, so the tzitz is meratzah. But the karbanis tzibur that the Kohen Gadol was bringing on Yom Kippur, those are karbanis tzibur. For karbanis tzibur, it's hutra. So here Rabbi Yehuda clearly says that it's hutra to the extent that it's not with difficulty. It's totally mutter. Even betumah, you don't even need the ritzui of the tzitz at all. Okay, so now the Gemara is asking that if so, the same thing should apply to the Korban Pesach. So Taisus here clarifies, even though the Korban Pesach is not mamash a Korban Tzibur, but the expression that Rabbi Yehuda says, Tuma Hutra B'Tzibur, refers to any carbon, even if it's a carbon Yachid as well, like on the Kohen Gadol, and Yom Kippur, he brings the Par, Yom Kippurim, and the other things that he brings that are not even a Korban Tzibur. But the fact that these are Karbanis that are brought at a set time, on Yom Kippur, and over here the Korban Pesach that's brought on Erev Pesach in a set time, those are the things that are Hutter B'Tzibur completely, and you don't need at all the Ritzui of the Tzitz. That's what he responded to Rab Shimon. Okay, so the question is, how could Rabbi Yehuda here say that you can add a month, make a Shana Mu'beres, in order to bring the Korban Pesach Petara? If according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no need for it. It's totally Hutra. There's no issue at all. Says the Gemara, now the time, according to your reasoning that you're questioning what Rabbi Yehuda said here, let's go back to what Rabbi Yehuda says in the Braise. Take Shilach, he gufe. What Rabbi Yehuda says in the Braise, he's contradicting himself. Because what does it say? Rabbi Yehuda, first it says Rabbi Yehuda said, Ma'abrin, that Bezdin could make a Ibiyar in order to bring the Korban Pesach Betara. And then V'omer Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'isa b'Chizkiya melech Yehuda she'ibres hashana b'pnei atumah, u'bikish rachma malatzmai. He brings the story of Chizkiya melech that was Ma'abed the year for this reason, and then he asked for a kapara for this. So he's bringing a story that's a contradiction to what he just said. This is a good enough of a reason to be Ma'abed the year, and you don't need any kapara for this. So Ella, therefore the Gemara says, Chesuri mechsere v'achi ketani. It's missing in this Braise, and you have to learn it as follows. And you start from the beginning. The Tanakama says, you cannot establish a Shana Mu'beres because of the Tumah for the Korban Pesach. Now the Tanakama says, if they use this for a reason to be a Ibiyar Mu'beres, it'll be a Shana Mu'beres. Rabbi Yehuda says, even b'di'eved, it will not be a Shana Mu'beres. Adarabah, Rabbi Yehuda is the one that holds the Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur, so there's no reason at all to use this to make a Shana Mu'beres. And on that, Rabbi Yehuda v'chulu, as the Braise says, that Rabbi Yehuda brought a raya to his opinion from Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda that used this as a reason to be Ma'abed the year, and then afterwards he said they needed a kapara for this. Okay, so now the Gemara goes on to the next opinion of the Braise. So ihachi, if this is the case, that you're saying that the Tanakama says that b'di'eved you could establish it as a Shana Mu'beres for this reason. So then Rab Shimon Aimer, Rab Shimon says, if because of the tumah they made it the Shana Mu'beres, so then Me'uberes, it will take effect, Haina Tanakama. Isn't he saying, according to the way you just explained the Braise, he's saying the exact same thing as the Tanakama, that b'di'eved it takes effect. So Rava said, not l'chatchila ikebinayu. The difference between them is whether you use this as a reason l'chatchila. The Tanakama holds l'chatchila not. B'di'eved it takes effect. Rab Shimon, when he says imipnei atumei brua, he means to say really even l'chatchila. He's only using this term that sounds like he's speaking about b'di'eved because he comes after what Rabbi Yehuda said, which was discussing even b'di'eved not. So he's also saying b'di'eved, but really Rab Shimon holds that even l'chatchila this could be used as a reason to be ma'aber the year. Tani nami hachi. This is also how we learned in another Braise. You can't use the reason of tumah for the Korban Pesach as a reason l'chatchila to be ma'aber the year. Rab Shimon Aimer, however, Rab Shimon says ma'abrin. Even l'chatchila you could be ma'aber the year for this reason. So Ella, Rab Shimon goes on to say, why did Chizkiyahu Melech daven for a kapara for what he did? Because you could only be ma'aber it if it's still in the month of Adar. For hu iber Nisan b'Nisan, and he was ma'aber in Nisan when it's already after Chodesh Nisan, meaning they already established it, they called it, they announced it as Chodesh Nisan, and he then changed his mind and said, no, you should establish it as Chodesh Adar Sheni. That's why he was asking a kapara for himself. Okay, so now the Gemara will discuss this opinion of Rab Shimon regarding what Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda did wrong. So Amamar, the Tana here said, and he established in Nisim that it should still be Ad Sheni. Like the Gemara, when we learn, there's a drasha you learn from the pasuk, and this refers to the first months of the year, which is Nisan. And Nisan, and after Nisan, you can't go back and establish Adar Sheni from the 12th month of the previous year. So this is a drasha that how could the Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda not know of this drasha? How did he make a mistake about this? And says the Gemara, Shmuel. His mistake was regarding what Shmuel said. Shmuel said, already on the 30th day of Adar Rishon, or right now it's just one Adar, the 30th day of Adar, you can't then on that day decide that it should be a second month Adar Sheni. Hoyol v'roy l'koyven Nisan, even though it's still Adar. It did not yet establish it as Chodesh Nisan yet. But because it's a day that's Roy, that it's fit to be the Rish Chodesh of Nisan, you can't already establish it for Adar Sheni. Now, v'Iyu Savar, however, Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda, he held Hoyol v'roy lo yamrinan, that this svar of Hoyol v'roy he didn't hold of in the beginning, and therefore he did establish it as a Chodesh Adar Sheni, and then he asked for a kapara for this. Tanyanami Hachi, we learned so in a Braisa as well, that you don't establish Chodesh Adar Sheni on the 30th day of Adar. Hoyel v'roy l'koyven Nisan. Since this is a day that could already be established as Chodesh Nisan, so it's part of the drasha of a Chodesh Zelachem that you can't anymore establish it as Chodesh Adar Sheni. This is Rashi's pshat in the Gemara. There is, though, I think one of the Rishonim, I think maybe the Yad Ramah, he says that the simple pshat of the way you read the words of the Braisa is that V'hu iber Nisan ben Nisan, that he was Ma'aber Nisan. It sounds like the Braisa is saying that he added and he made two months of Nisan. That's how the Gemara understood l'chatchila what he did. Okay, going on to the next opinion brought before in the Braisa. What was the mistake that Chizkiyahu Melech made, and what did he ask kapara for? So the third opinion was Rab Shimon ben Yehuda Mishum Rab Shimon Mipnei Sheheisi Es Yisrael Lasa is Pesach Sheni. He gave Yidden an advice that they should wait and bring the korban Pesach Sheni and not the Pesach Rishon. That's the mistake he made. Okay, so what was the story exactly? What happened? Hey Chidomi. Amar Rav Ashi, so Rav Ashi says, Kogoin, the story happened as follows. Now, as I mentioned before, when it comes to the korban Pesach, if Roiv of the Tzibur is Tamei, they bring the Pesach Rishon. If only a miyot of the tzibur is tamei, then they're pushed off to Pesach Sheni. Okay, so now here the question is, are women included in when you count the number of Klal Yisrael or not? So the case here was as follows. Kagayin Shoy Yisrael mechzet meim or mechzet tahirim. When you looked at the Yidden, so they were half with tamei and half with tahir. Or Lav Dafke, Rashi says, it could even be most with tamei. And then v'noshim mashlimis l'tahirim. So that was the men. By the men, they were half and half, or maybe even most of them were tamei, and therefore they would have been pushed. They should not have been pushed off to the second korban to Pesach Sheni, because most of them are tamei and they bring the Pesach Rishon. But now the women, if you count also the women, then mashlima is l'tahirim va'oitveis aleim. And then they're going to add that now it'll be more tahirim if you include the women in the count here. So how do you count this? Do you count it only by the men, and therefore it's mostly tamei, so they bring the korban Pesach Rishon? Or do you include it in the count the women, and then they're mostly tahirim, and they can be pushed off to the Pesach Sheni? So now Meikara Sovar, in the beginning Chizkiyahu Melech held Noshim Berisha Chayva, that the korban Pesach Rishon for the women, it's an obligation to bring this korban just like the men. So therefore, the Havu Miyutun Tmein. So we're including in the count the women as well. So now it's only a minority of Klal Yisrael that's Tamei. Umiyutan Mitchul Pesach Sheni. So the minority that's Tamei does get pushed off to bring the Pesach Sheni. You only bring the Pesach Rishon Betumeh if it's Reiv of the Tzibur. But if you include the women, so it's Reiv of the Tzibur was Tahir, so they are pushed off to Pesach Sheni. But then he had charata and he asked for a kapara for this because of L'B'Soiv Savar. In the end, he changed his opinion and he held that Noshim Berishayin Rishos, the Havalut, so the women that are bringing the korban Pesach Rishon, it's a Rishos. They're not obligated. They could join and bring the korban Pesach Rishon, but they don't have an obligation. So if so, when we count, we don't include the women in this count. The Havalut Tmeim Ruba. So therefore, for the Pesach Rishon, the ones that were Tamei are the Raiv, and the men, which were the Raiv that are Tamei, and the Ruba Lematchul the Pesach Sheni. Raiv of the Tzibur that's Tamei is not pushed off to the Pesach Sheni. That's what happened here with Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda, according to this opinion. Rashi here brings that in the Gemara in Psachim, this shaila about the women, whether they have a korban Pesach Rishon is a chayva or a shus, is a machlokes Tanaim over there. And that itself was the two svaris that Chizkiyahu Melech had. Gufe, going back to a point that was mentioned before, Omar Shmuel said, Ein ma'abren es hashana b'yom shloishim shel Adar. You can't establish a second Adar if it's already the 30th day of the month of Adar, hoyel v'roy l'koyven Nisan, because it's a day that could be established already as Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Now, Ibrua Mai, what happens if they wore ma'aber on the 30th day that it should be Chodesh another Adar Sheni? Amarule, so Allah said, in such a case, Ein mekatchen es a Chodesh. So in such a case, Bezdin will not be Mekadesh to Chodesh, meaning that usually Bezdin announces Mekudesh for the new month, for the Rish Chodesh, but if they establish that it should be a Adar Sheni, and it was already on Lamed the Adars, and they were not supposed to establish this, so then when it comes to the Rish Chodesh of that month, Bezdin should not announce that it's Adar Sheni. And then it's going to be another month of Adar without Bezdin announcing this, and then the following month, they're going to announce that it's Chodesh Nisan. But over here, for this month, though, they should not be Mekadesh and announce that it's Adar Sheni. They should not say Mekudesh at all, actually. That's the point. Bezdin does not say Mekudesh at all. Okay, so now what happens if Kitchu, if not only did they make the Cheshbon and say that on the 30th day of Adar, that has to be a Adar Sheni, but they actually already announced also Mekudesh. So once they are saying that on the 30th day, they're not supposed to announce Mekudesh. What's if they did announce Mekudesh? So Amar Rava says, if they announced Mekudesh, then the Mekudesh goes according to the halacha which is supposed to be, and that is that it's going to be the Chodesh Nisan. So the whole Ibur that they decided on the 30th day is batal. Rav Nachman Omar Mu'uber u'Mekudesh. Even if they announced, but then they weren't supposed to, but the evidence if they announced Mekudesh, so the Mekudesh does go on the Adar Sheni. Oh, Rav Nachman. So Rav asks Rav Nachman that this could bring to a big problem. Why? Mechti, let's see. Mipuria lepische, from Purim till Pesach, Klosen Yaimen. There's 30 days. Havo. 30 days. Mipuria, already starting from Purim, Darshinon be'ilchus Pesach. That's when you have to start learning halachas of Pesach, because it's 30 days before Yom Tov. The Tanya is we learned in the Braisa, Shalom Hilchas of Pesach, Chaytin lePesach, Shleishim Yaim, that you learn the halachas of Pesach 30 days before Pesach. Rav Shum beGamliel Leimer, Shtei Shabbosis, that you begin learning the halachas of Pesach for 2 weeks. Okay, so now you're already starting to learn the halachas of Pesach, either from 2 weeks before, or here we're actually going according to the opinion that we started already from Purim, from 30 days before, and now Vichimot Yiresh Yarche, when it comes to the beginning of the month, Marchik and Lei, and now you're establishing that it should be a Ibiyar, and you're announcing Mekudesh, and it's establishing that it should be a second Adar, and what's going to happen? Osil Zulzuli B'chometz. People are going to come, and they're not going to believe, they're not going to know, and they're not going to believe the fact that they established another month of Adar, and they're going to be Mezalzel and Chometz, and they're going to eat Chometz on Pesach. So the point there is, Rav is asking Rav Nachman that according to you, that even if Bezdin announces Mekudesh, still it takes effect to be a Adar Sheni, but how is it going to take effect to be a Adar Sheni? It's going to cause people to make a big mistake and think that it's not an Adar Sheni, that it's when Bezdin announced Mekudesh, it's really Chodesh Nisan, and they're not going to know the right time when Pesach is. They're going to be off a month regarding Pesach. Okay, so now there's a few things that have to be added here to what the Gemara says. First of all, the Mefarshim explain the reason why Rav is asking this question specifically on Rav Nachman, even though even Rav agrees that if they want to establish a Shana Mu'uberes on the 30th day of Adar without announcing Mekudesh, then it will become another month of Adar Sheni, and then only the following month will it be Chodesh Nisan. So even according to Rav himself, this will be a problem. But so the Mefarshim say, the Rishonim I think already say this, that according to Rava, when Bezdin does not announce Mekudesh, so then there's a heker. People see that Bezdin did not announce it the way they usually do, and therefore people will know that it's not yet Chodesh Nisan. There's a Adar Sheni here. But according to Rav Nachman, Bezdin is announcing Mekudesh on the 30th day, just like every other time they announce Mekudesh. And when Bezdin says Mekudesh, Bezdin doesn't say which month it is. Bezdin just says Mekudesh. So there's no difference between the way they announced it this month and every month, and because they only decided on the 30th day, people won't know that the Mekudesh was really for Chodesh Adar Sheni. They'll think that the Mekudesh is for Chodesh Nisan. There's no hecker, there's no difference. So this is something that Rava asks Rav Nachman. It could bring a reason that people are going to be mezalzel in Pesach, meaning they won't know when's the right time for Pesach. Now, another point here that Tosfos says is that Bechlal, the Gemara could have asked, we're talking about the 30th day of Adar, that there's a problem if they decide on that day, because really you're not supposed to, because it's Roy to be Chodesh Nisan, and that's the whole discussion here. But how about any other time from Purim until the last day of the month of Adar? Then you're allowed to be Ma'aber the Shana, to decide to add another month of Adar. So there should be a problem then. If any time after Purim, when people start learning Hilchas Pesach and they're already preparing for a month that's coming, and they, in their mind, Pesach is going to be in 30 days. So already from after Purim, there should be a problem to add another month of Adar. The Gemara could have asked that question as well. That's what Tosfos says. Okay, so now how does the Gemara answer this? So the Gemara says, Amalei, Rav Nachman answered him, Meide Yediyeh, people really know, the Shatem Ma'abarte, the Chushbon Etalia Milsa, that usually Ashana Mu'beres is based on the Cheshbon of the Tkufis. In other words, that if the winter is already going too late and people know that the season of Chodesh Aviv is not yet the time for Pesach, so people will know to ask about this, because people know that this is the main reason why you make the Shana Mu'beres. And therefore, Chushbon and therefore they'll say that Rabbanan didn't sit down and make the cheshbon until now, but even if they started learning the halachas already from Purim, they're not going to come to make a mistake. And when Bezdin says Mekudesh, they're going to find out whether it's Mekudesh for Chodesh Adar Sheni or Chodesh Nisan. And therefore, there's no issue that they're going to come to be mezalzel to eat chametz and Pesach.